Let's, without any further ado, let us bring on the host of the Houston We Have a Problem YouTube show and podcast, Mr. Houston Wade.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you doing?
Good, man. Thank you for taking time to do the show. So a fan of the show and a comedian, Michael McCarthy, that I know, I've talked to him off camera about crypto, and he told me about he was involved with the GameStop. What is happening? I personally have been covering a lot recently about the FTX scam. Yeah. And I keep uncovering more and more stuff about Sam Bankman-Fried. That just seems like it just gets bigger and bigger, that mountain of corruption and fraud. And I think we're going to be learning about that for months, if not years. Yeah. But I wanted to bring you on the show because Michael reached out to me on social media about what is going on, and with, I believe, I don't know much about it, FINRA. And so admittedly, I don't know much about this at all. And so I wanted to bring you on the show because it sounds like there's a lot of similar type fraud, or some people are even saying this could even be a bigger scam.
I think it's a bigger scam personally. I think it's a lot more money. Yeah.
Okay. Well, why don't you do me a favor, and anyone watching who isn't as knowledgeable about this, again, I'm pretty much don't know much about it at all. So why don't you walk us through just from page one, exactly what this is, what and what is now happening. And then of course, at the end, what okay. people can do.
So to really start, we have to go back to sort of what the fundamentals were of the stock market back in the day, which is paper certificates. So when you bought a stock, your broker would order a stock from another broker, and then they would literally give a stack of sheets to a courier, and they would bicycle across Manhattan and deliver them to the other brokerage and then put those into your account, right? And that was a time-consuming process. It took hours, days for these things to clear and for the money to change hands and the paper certificates to get delivered. And so in the 1970s, the market got together and decided to create an electronic system that could do that. So these computers could just assign relationships to stocks as they got ordered. And the clearing process was quicker. You could do fast trading. And you could do all this stuff during the day. Then at night, the computer would rectify everything and move on. Well, one giant glaring loophole that got created in the electronic system was that you could sell stock that didn't exist. So, and with a paper certificate, if you wanted to short a stock, you had to call up, a mutual fund, a pension, whoever, and say, "Hey, I would like to borrow your shares, and I'll pay interest, whatever." And they would, send a messenger across town to your firm, give you the shares, and then you would sell them, and on the market, hoping the price would go down. And they go back into the market, buy up the shares at a cheaper price, and return them to whoever you lent from. And that's the traditional way of shorting a stock. With this electronic system, it allowed hedge funds, market makers, big institutions to actually go on the computer and sell shares of stock that don't exist. And the main computer mainframe at the DTCC, the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, which kind of handles all of these transactions, it allows it. So if I'm a hedge fund and I want to short a stock, I could go out and have pain in the ass problem. I'd go borrow shares from someone and pay interest rates, or I could just sell shares that don't exist and hope that I can drive this company into bankruptcy and never have to cover my position. So, and there's a big incentive to do that, because if you can get a company into bankruptcy and you never have to return the shares, you never have to pay any taxes on your play. You only pay taxes when you close your position. So your position never has to close. It's all free money. So if you can drive a stock from $100 down to zero, and you can do that with 100 million shares, you just made, $10 billion off of nothing, right? Because the stock goes to zero, the company doesn't exist anymore. How are you bother replacing those shares? So in the last 30 years, especially since the early 90s, short hedge funds doing these plays where they're creating counterfeit shares and inventing them out of thin air and selling them has become the norm. And they do it with a lot of mid-cap stocks and smaller. And recently we saw it happen with GameStop and AMC and Bed Bath & Beyond and a lot of companies you might see popping up in the news. And they figured that, especially during COVID, when consumers weren't out going to shopping malls and stuff, they could just hammer these things down and they could get them into bankruptcy and eventually into the pink sheets and never have to cover any of their positions. The retail investors kind of figured out like, hey, if we just keep buying and holding and never panic and sell our shares, the market never further dilutes and the price doesn't go down and the price might even go up. And if the price goes up, all of a sudden the liabilities get insane for these hedge funds. So you saw GameStop was at $2.57 in like April 2020, right? And then by January 2020, it broke above $450. And so for the billion shares that these short hedge funds had created out of nothing, all of a sudden they were facing $450 billion in liability. And we were about to collapse the entire American economy. Because once one hedge fund went down and their assets got sold off, it would drop the price of bonds and stocks across the board, cause other hedge fund to go under, and so on and so on and so on. They're about to have a chain reaction. So the brokers got together and just panicked and said, no more buying of the stock. And they halted all retail transactions because it was the retail FOMO that was causing the price to go up. So that's analogous to what's going on now with MMTLP. So MMTLP started out as an oil company called Torchlight. It's a small little oil company. They have 200,000 acres or so in West Texas, sorry. And, 3 to 5 billion barrels of oil, few trillion cubic feet of natural gas. They got some proven reserves there. But during COVID, oil prices went negative because people weren't driving, they weren't flying, stuff wasn't shipping, and there was nowhere to store all this oil that's being pumped. And so they had to like pay people to take oil off their hands. And as a result, Torchlight, the share price went down, 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 down. And then the short sellers started piling on. And they started selling shares that didn't exist, causing the float to dilute and the price to drop even more, which would cause holders of the stock to panic and sell what they had to get what they can out of it, which would again cause the price to drop down. And they'd gotten down to something like 21 cents a share. And we're going to get delisted by the NASDAQ. And along came this Canadian tech company, this little material sciences nanotech company called Metamaterials. And they had launched in March 2020 their IPO in Canada. But their main product was this pair of eyeglasses for pilots that block laser light. So like 12-year-olds with laser pointers can't dazzle pilots. Well, they launched their IPO like 4 days after no one was flying anymore because of COVID. And their IPO just went flat. Like no one cared. So they're like, okay, let's wheel and deal. Let's see if we can get on the American exchange, get on the NASDAQ. So they contacted Torchlight and they said, hey, let's merge. Your company's toast. Our company wants to have a future. We want a listing on the NASDAQ. Let's just merge. Your shares will become our shares and we'll take over your ticker and that'll be cool. And so the deal got struck, shook hands, high five, whatever. And so if you held these Torchlight shares prior to the merger, you would get shares in Metamaterial, but then you'd also get these preferred shares that represented the holdings for all these oil wells and natural gas wells. And so that became the Metamaterial preferred share, MMAT1. And it was not supposed to trade. It was supposed to just be people's accounts and sit there until something happened to oil fields. And the idea was they're just going to sell it to Exxon or Chevron or someone. And it wasn't going to be that much money because oil wasn't worth spit at the time. So everyone's thinking maybe $1 or $2 a share for the 165 million of these shares. Well, since then, oil has skyrocketed. And now if they sell their assets, the dividend could be anywhere from $30 to $120 a share, maybe even more. And that created a bunch of people going, oh my, because a lot of these folks, like I paid 87 cents for mine, right? So if I can get 120 bucks out of that 87-cent investment, rad. Like we're all stoked. Well, supposedly when the merger happened, all the shorts were supposed to close their positions in Torchlight because you can't carry over a short position when the QSIP changes and becomes another company. They're supposed to close everything. They didn't. And so a lot of people who have these preferred shares, MMAT1 shares, had fakes that they just changed the name on them, and they were still a fake share. They're still counterfeit. And we don't necessarily know how many of them. The estimates are 200 to 300 million, maybe more. That of
300 million shares.
Yeah, there should only be 165 million of them, but it's likely there's 200 to 300 million, maybe more. They're in people's accounts. So October last year, a couple of market makers got together and they said, "Hey, you and I have a lot of short shares in this, and we're screwed if this dividend comes out, because if we have to pay, $100 per share on 300 million fake shares, that's going to bankrupt us." Right? So they got together, said, "Let's start trading this thing," and they just started trading it, even though in the filing it says not a tradable security, right? It's not tradable.
And this started, you said, in October of 21.
Yep. October 6th, I think, or maybe October 7th, somewhere in there. And it started trading as MMTLP, or the Metamaterial Torchlight Preferred Share. And it started trading like $3. And then they started shorting it down. So a lot of folks are like, well, wait a minute, this is weird. This is not supposed to trade, but it actually might be worth a lot of money. So folks started buying it, which meant a whole bunch of generation of even more shares were happening. And this went on all year until this summer. And the folks behind MMTLP, the old Torchlight folks, contacted FINRA, the regulatory agency. It's supposed to regulate all this stuff, and say, no, this isn't supposed to trade. They contacted them and said, hey, why is this trading? It's not supposed to trade. And FINRA went, too late. That's basically their answer. Like, they're the regulator. They're supposed to say, no, this isn't supposed to happen. This is bad. Stop. But the chairman of one of the market makers that started trading was at the time on the board at FINRA, a guy named Ari.
Oh, weird. That's such a wacky coincidence.
Exactly, right?
Man.
Yeah.
That's so bizarre. That always happens.
FINRA isn't a government agency. It's a private company that's been granted powers by Congress to regulate the market. So they are entirely not related to actual governmental regulating. They make their own rules. They're made up of these members, these hedge funds and market makers that are policing themselves, of course.
This is literally, I talk about this all the time. It's literally like when police departments investigate themselves. It's akin to, like, let's have the drug cartels regulate their drug dealing, and then I'm sure it'll be fair.
My cocaine's the purest. You won't get it any finer anywhere. Yeah.
Right.
It is not Drano and fentanyl, trust me.
No.
So for the last year, the stock's been trading, and it got hammered down below $1 for a while, and then kind of settled out at like $1.40. And in July, the Metamaterial group, they filed to spin off Torchlight, or as they were calling it, NextBridge at the time, but still trading under MMTLP. They decided to make it a private company, remove it from the stock exchange entirely, so that it's all privately held. There's no QSIP. There's no way to trade it. And so they filed with SEC, this form called S1, saying, hey, we'll make this thing private. And the SEC took a few weeks to look it over. Like, okay, there's a couple of things in here they need to change. So change these things, refile again. They did that. And like, okay, a couple other things got changed. They filed a third time. And after they filed a third time, okay, now it's been like 5 months. We need one more thing from you, which is an update of your financials, because we need up-to-date financials. Give us the last 6 months of financials, and we'll be good to go. So they filed a fourth time, early November, and then November 16th, the SEC said, cool, you're approved. You can go private whenever you announce it. So there had to be at least a 15-day leeway for them announcing them going private. So they eventually announced, hey, we are going to stop trading the stock on December 12th. And on the 14th, anyone who still has their MMTLP shares will get new private shares in NextBridge. And all shorts need to close out their positions by the 12th, because you cannot have short positions on a private company. And everyone's like, woohoo, there's going to be a short squeeze, because there's a whole bunch of shares they got to close, and they have to do it by the 12th. We're going to be rich, right? I've got my 1,000 shares. I'm thinking they're going to be selling for hundreds, maybe even more a share, and I'll take care of my student loans, nice vacations, cool car, you name it. Okay, so the announcement's made. We now have this timeline of essentially 2.5 weeks of trading days, and the price starts skyrocketing. It goes from your $1.40 to $12.65, I think was the intraday high, and then starts kind of levels out. the metamaterial guys are asking, and the NextBridge guys are asking FINRA to put out what's called a corporate action. Basically, giving the brokers and everyone sort of guidance as to what's supposed to happen. I mean, they know what's supposed to happen, but they need like the official word of God to say, this is your next move. And they wait and they wait and they wait. And finally, the Wednesday before, so this is Wednesday, the 7th, I believe. I'm looking at my calendar here. Yes, Wednesday the 7th, they finally released their corporate action. So it's 5 calendar days until the stock's supposed to stop trading. And this corporate action says, hey, you got to close your positions. The stock's going private. If you want to buy tomorrow, the 8th is the last day you can buy, and have your 2-day settlement period to make sure you are on the data record to get your NextBridge shares out of this. So you got just a couple of days and you got to start closing. And everyone's like, finally, now we're going to have this crazy short squeeze go on. The 8th happens. The stock price gets hammered from $9 down to $2.89. 13 million shares trade, 9 million of which are shares that don't exist. 9 million fake shares traded and hammered the price down. No one was forced to close. They allowed all the short sellers to sell as many shares as they want. And then at 1:30 a.m. that night, FINRA releases an emergency memo saying that they're halting trading on the stock with what's called a U3 order. Something that's only happened 3 times on an American stock in history. And it usually involves copious amounts of fraud, weird things where like insiders are suing each other. One time was a company that was doing a 100-to-1 reverse split. So they take 100 shares and make it into 1 share, and then immediately do a 10-to-1 forward split. And they're like, this is messed up. Like, we're halting your trading for a couple of days. So this U3 order is specifically designed for stocks that are supposed to trade in perpetuity, not for a stock that's going to stop trading in the end. And they cited what they called an extraordinary event. And they were protecting investors from this potential extraordinary event. And they said no trading until the stock stops trading on Monday afternoon, and then becomes private, and that's it. You'll just get shares of NextBridge. The problem is if you have one of these synthetics, one of these counterfeit shares, you don't get shares of NextBridge. You don't get them. So you invested in the stock with maybe the intent to either get NextBridge shares or to sell during this forced short squeeze that's going to happen over these 2 days. And all of a sudden, they stop trading. Now, people complain to FINRA. They're like, hey, why are you protecting me from becoming a multimillionaire? You're claiming you're protecting investors. I don't feel very protected right now. I feel as though you just kept me from getting $1,000 to $10,000 per share and living on a beach for the rest of my life. Who are you protecting? Could it be possibly the hedge funds that now might have $2 or $3 trillion in liability? Because imagine 300 million shares selling for thousands of dollars each. You are in the trillions in liability. So that means all these hedge funds blink out of existence. That means the prime brokers, the investment banks, the Goldman Sachs, Credit Suisse, JP Morgan, Nomura, Merrill Lynch, whatever, they start blinking out of existence because they've allowed the system to create so many fake shares that the liability is completely impossible to cover. They can't. And so FINRA, in a panic, because I don't think they were really paying attention before, but I think that Thursday night, after the stock price got hammered down 289, like, oh, let's just open up the book and see, just what kind of closing has to happen on Friday and Saturday, or Friday and Monday. And they went, oh my God, panic, stop trading. So,
because correct me if I'm wrong here, real quick. I want to interject this. So if FINRA was paying attention, and doing the job they're supposed to be doing, wouldn't they have way earlier in the process said, wait a minute, there's all these synthetic stocks, and this can't happen, to avoid this very situation from happening? Right.
The problem is that the American market is designed specifically to cater to those who destroy American businesses. That's how they make their money, right? You don't make your money. There's a couple of like IPOs where people are like, oh, it's a Facebook or whatever. But most companies in America are small and mid cap companies that trade over the counter. They don't need to raise that much money, but they might be a small company, 400 or 500 employees. They might do some valuable things, make a little gizmo for a car, a mining company or whatever. But the market, in the way this fast system was designed for electronic trading, specifically caters to companies trying to destroy other companies. And there's an entire industry built around it. So you remember the corporate raiders from the 80s and your Bain Capital guys like Mitt Romney and stuff. They're part of it. Basically, how it works is a company wants to do an IPO, and they get an underwriter. They get Salomon Smith Barney or Merrill Lynch or whoever to be their underwriter, and they launch their IPO. Well, Salomon Smith Barney or whoever might be with, they might do a deal, and it's kind of organized crime, with someone else and start short selling shares even before the IPO happens. They promise shares to other people and they lend them out, and this thing will get hammered from the get-go for most of these companies. And so they start hammering the stock down. Legitimately, they might be borrowing shares and flooding the market with those shares. But then they're like, okay, we don't want to pay taxes on this, and we want to maximize our profit. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start counterfeiting shares. We're going to sell all these fake shares that don't exist and hammer it down even more. Then we'll get the investors to start panicking, and they'll start selling their shares. And then we're going to get a couple of our guys on the board of the company. So they will get some insiders of the hedge funds to be an executive VP, to be on the board, to be CEO, and they'll start destroying the company from the inside. They will bring in consultants like Boston Consulting Group to be like, hey, our company's not doing that well. Perhaps you could shed some light, and we'll pay you $50 million to tell us how to run our company. The Boston Consulting Group will hem and haw, and they'll give the same answer they give to every company ever, which is, what you should do? You should sell off all of your assets. That would be brilliant. Sell off all your assets and then rent back that same space for a fortune. So, and I know you own this $10 million in property in your warehouse that you're in. Well, if you just sell it for like $8 million and you rent it back for $1 million a year, that's probably the best business move you can make. And then they'll say, you know what? You don't have to worry about upgrading your storefronts. Just let that stuff rot. Fire half your staff. They're redundant. And all of a sudden, logistics start to fail. Orders stop going through. Customers stop going to storefronts. Your customer service starts going down. And you're paying a fortune in all of these rent and everything else you didn't have to pay before. On top of that, you might have your corporate raider come in where they'll do a leveraged buyout and then liquidate everything else, and they'll just post your entire company as collateral and take out billions in loans and give themselves huge bonuses, and then just walk away to bankruptcy, leaving your company to some bank that doesn't want it, right? And in the meantime, they're shorting the stock and they're shorting the stock and they're shorting the stock, hoping that everything goes into bankruptcy. And this happens to like tens of thousands of companies across the U.S. markets.
And this is why I just want to interject this real quick.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why the GameStop thing made them so mad, was they got burned at their own game. And the stock market is not designed for just regular guys like you and I to make real money. I mean, if you buy $5,000 worth of stock and it goes up to 20 grand and you sell it, they're like, fine, great. But they don't want you becoming a millionaire. They don't want me becoming a millionaire.
They prefer if you buy $5,000 in stock and it goes to zero.
Yeah.
They like that a lot more. Because it's designed to siphon the money from you and I, and then get stuck with these, fat cats at the top. And the buy and hold strategy has screwed them, because their entire attack on companies, these short attacks on companies, are dependent upon us panicking and selling and contributing to the dilution of the float.
Yeah.
But we stopped doing that in the last 2 years. We've seen multiple squeezes of all these little companies happen at the same time. So when you short a company, if you take a finance 101 class, they'll teach you about short selling, and your potential when you short sell, your hand gets in the camera there, your potential short sell, you sell a stock at this price, and if it goes down, you can make, that much money. But if people buy the stock and refuse to sell it back to you, and your shares get recalled, and whoever you lent them to you is like, look, I need my shares back. I'm going to vote. I'm going to sell them, whatever. You have to go in the market and buy them, and they don't want to sell it to you. All of a sudden, that potential for wealth you can make off that stock, the cap disappears, and there's infinite risk. Meaning, I don't have to sell my shares to you if I don't want to, but you have to buy them. And that's where we were on MMTLP, was I don't have to sell them, but you need to figure out how to get 300 million of them out of us, and that's going to cost you a fucking fortune. And that's where FINRA panicked, and they put the halt on, because they knew it was going to cost essentially, let's just say, 1/7 of the U.S. economy to buy back all these shares. That's just one of tens of thousands of companies in the exact same space.
So now So they've halted it. So any of you holders, you can't sell it back and make big profit. And they don't want you to pay off your student loans.
Yep.
They want us all in debt. That's why we don't have
Yeah.
free college, or
Yep.
like 39 countries have. It's why we don't have free healthcare like 100 countries have.
Yep.
It's because they want us in debt up to our eyeballs. And whenever there's an opportunity for regular people to make a big profit like this, like you guys found their scam, you're using their scam against them.
Mhm.
It's why they don't want people buying Bitcoin.
Yeah.
They want you panic selling it and dumping it. And that's why right now, this FTX thing, all the mainstream media, business channels, Yahoo Finance or whatever, they're all like, oh, this crypto is just a big filthy scam, because they want regular retail investors to dump their Bitcoin so that these institutional money can buy it up. Anyway, I don't want to go on a Bitcoin tirade, but that's why I'm a big proponent of Bitcoin specifically, because it gives regular people a chance to acquire wealth and get out of this rat race of work a shitty job, be in debt up to your eyeballs, and being basically an indentured servant to the ruling elite. So now, since FINRA has blocked that you can't sell off your shares, and there's all these synthetic shares out there, where is it? Like where are you at right now?
So there's a couple of things that will happen when they sell a bunch of these naked shares, and they're supposed to cover their position or close out, right? And so one of the things that happens is called an FTD, a failure to deliver. So you're a hedge fund, you sell me a share that doesn't exist. The two brokers go to clear the transaction, and one of them hands the money over. The other one's like, they never gave me the share. They panic. So they reach into another customer's account in their brokerage, and they take out a real share, and they complete the transaction. And they put a synthetic, a little placeholder, a little IOU in their customer's account. And they have to do this millions and millions of times, to the point where sometimes they're grabbing a synthetic and passing it over because they don't have any real shares in their brokerage to clear this thing. And this clock starts, and it's called T35. It's a 35-day clock where if the naked short seller doesn't come up with the share to replace, to make up for that borrowing the broker had to do, the broker by law is supposed to liquidate the hedge fund and then use that money to actually go on the market and buy shares to cover the transaction. But there's a very weird, glaring loophole in that, which is the short seller can take all those T35, fake shares that are due as debt, and they can package them up in this little bubble. And then they can trade it with another hedge fund that has the same thing with different stock, and they swap it. And that clock starts all over again for 35 days. And so this derivatives market is huge. We're talking like $600 trillion of debt is being swapped around every few days, from hedge fund to hedge fund, from holdings company to holdings company, from bank to bank, all because no one can afford to close these positions, to actually go out and buy the shares that they sold. And the market makers, the numbers on this stuff is huge. Citadel, last year, their 2021 financials reported they had sold $70 billion in stock, not yet delivered. The year before it was $18 billion. So it's going up. Every year it's going up insanely much. And that's just what they're reporting on. Because the market makers don't actually necessarily have to report on that stuff. And so the problem is with MMTLP, NextBridge, is that because it's a private company, you can't actually package it up into one of these things and do it as a swap, because it's not supposed to. It's a private company. You aren't supposed to be able to do that. So these hedge funds have started making weird little random QSIP numbers for what's left in their brokerages, and they keep telling everyone like, "Oh, we're just waiting for to get the shares delivered. You're going to get them. You're going to get them." But a private company has no QSIP, so why are you making a QSIP, right? And so the investors are calling their brokers like, "Hey, where are my shares?" The broker says, "Oh, you have to call AST, the transfer agent, and we're just waiting for them to deliver the shares." You call AST. AST's like, "Yeah, we got the shares. We gave what few were left over to the DTC." So you have to call the DTC. You call the DTC, and DTC says, "We're just waiting for the brokers to ask for them." So you got to call the brokers. So you call the brokers, like, "Well, you got to call AST. I don't know." And it just becomes this passing the buck, run around cycle. And all of them are insisting that you have real shares the entire even though AST, this transfer agent, my cat is now joining us here. AST, the transfer agent, has pretty much all 165 million shares in their accounts, because what happened was all these like European, Australian, Japanese, Singaporean, Chinese brokerages that were trading these Torchlight shares, when they merged and they got the preferred shares, they couldn't trade them on the market anymore because they didn't have access to the OTC markets in America. So what they did was they registered all of them with the transfer agent, because what else are you going to do, right? And so when it came time for the Americans and Canadians to get access and to get their real shares, there was no room at the transfer agent because all 165 million shares were already filled. So if you're an American with shares in your account, you have the fakes. So the system was specifically designed to punish the American citizens. Specifically, like, we are the ones who have the fake shares and we don't have the real shares. And all three of these regulators and brokers are giving us a total runaround on it. So what's happening now is people have filed with the FBI, they filed with FINRA, they filed with the SEC, and there's lawsuits going on. And there's a big lawsuit. Probably the most important one is happening with this young woman, Rosa Tawil, in the Northern District of Florida. And she has filed an emergency injunction with a federal judge, basically saying, like, this is messed up. You have to give us our 2 days of trading, and they got to close these positions back. And so we're waiting to hear on how Rosa's hearing is gone, because it is a good chance the federal judge says, yeah, the law says that they've got to close these positions. It also says that FINRA didn't have the authority to stop trading. And yeah, so maybe we'll just, 2 more days of trading. Tell the brokers, you got to start closing these things. And it might go through the roof. It might destroy the entire American economy. But there's no other way you're going to get this system fixed unless you finally pull that Band-Aid. Because, this is a nothing company. And if that's happening with this nothing company, it's happening with every single other company out there. And we're talking literally, $600 trillion in derivatives that are bouncing around. Someone was pulling up the derivatives market and showed that there's like $2 quadrillion in liabilities that the major investment banks have been stashing since at least 2008. Because a lot of like the mortgage-backed securities and things like that were never closed. And those you can go and you can still buy Washington Mutual mortgage-backed securities, Wachovia mortgage-backed securities, Lehman Brothers. Those companies don't exist anymore, but their contracts for these mortgage-backed securities still do. So it's just a big compounded problem, and it's all about sweeping it under the rug. Like, it's insane. I don't know how much further to go on that, but
this is like mind blowing. In one sense, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, because there was no regulation put in place after 2008. We had Dodd-Frank, which is a Band-Aid on a shotgun wound. There hasn't been any real.
There was one regulation. That was because the short sellers started targeting banks and their prime brokers. They started shorting Goldman Sachs, started shorting JP Morgan, started shorting Chase Manhattan. And so those guys went to Congress and begged them to make shorting financial institutions illegal. That's the only ones that have a regulation protecting them. You can short everyone else you want, but just not them.
Of course. Of course, the rich got some regulation in their favor. Of course they did. In the one sense, I'm a little like, my jaw's on the floor a little bit, but then on the other hand, it's like, I shouldn't be surprised, because I don't follow the financial markets the way you do, but my show, Political Vigilante, what I've been doing, I've been doing this show for almost 6 years, is to show how our whole system is broken. And it doesn't matter if you've got a Republican or Democrat in the White House or Congress, they're all bought and paid for. Yep. And this is a prime example. The 2008 crisis was a result of both parties. Goldman Sachs has been in every presidential cabinet since Reagan. Like, if you think, there was the leaked memo from Citibank showing who they wanted in Obama's cabinet. Every single person ended up in his cabinet. Yeah. And then he ran on I'm going to clean up George Bush's mess. And I fell for it. I voted for Obama, and he came in and did nothing. He gave them $700-800 billion. He didn't. 600 foreclosures still happen, my house being one of them. And they didn't regulate a damn thing. And weird, for the last 12, 14 years now, all we've been hearing is another housing crisis is coming, another financial crisis is coming because there's no regulation. And what you're telling us is there's $600 trillion in fake stocks bouncing around there that someone's going to have to pay for. And when they do, the whole system comes crumbling down.
Oh yeah, because the only way to do it is you spin up the printers at the Fed and the Treasury, and you start printing money, which is going to lead to massive amounts of inflation. And so there's no other way to avoid this other than, just doing it now. Just fix it now, and we can finally create a system that's designed to like empower Americans and to, I don't know.
Oh, don't say
boost the
that.
American
They don't
economy.
want that.
Yeah.
They don't want that's a dirty word. Empower Americans. They want us stupid, fighting with each other, and in debt. That's what they want.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
so what I've been telling my viewers is be annoying as hell, because with MMTLP, there's 64,000 Americans who are invested in this, right? And that's a decent number of people. And what's happened is so far the SEC has been calling people back, and they've literally said, we've never had more complaints on a single ticker than this stock right now, ever in our history. And the cat's now trying to play with the Chiron as it goes across the screen. Back up, kitty. And I've been telling them, contact your elected representative. I don't care if it's Republican or Democrat, because you're going to go to them and you're going to explain the situation to them that FINRA illegally stopped trading on the stock, specifically because to keep you from becoming a millionaire. And you're going to ask your elected representative, like, okay, I'm sure you probably get a donation from this hedge fund manager or that hedge fund manager, but now I want you to imagine you got 6 hedge funds that are donating to you. Now imagine you've got 64,000 millionaires who could donate to you, right? Why don't you think about that? You have a lot more donations you can get for your campaigns if you all of a sudden can figure out how to get us our money. And you can now do something very popular that every one of your constituents love, which is when you, with the finance committee, yell at a banker, yell at a hedge fund manager. You can all of a sudden go out there and you can say, hey, FINRA, hey, Chase Manhattan, hey, Citadel, what's the deal? Why did you illegally do this? Why are you still selling shares against the law that are naked and aren't backed by anything? How are we going to stop this? How are you going to get people their money back? Because you want to have that fit. You want to be able to make those commercials. Senator John so-and-so stood up for Americans against these big bankers. And you made a fortune in the process because you got a whole bunch of your constituents piles of money. I want the foreign members who own the stock. Like they can go to their foreign minister in Sweden or UK or Germany or wherever and say, hey, the American market is screwing me and a whole bunch of your other citizens over. And I want you to complain to the US ambassador. And when the US ambassador is complained to by the foreign minister, he's got to send off a diplomatic cable to the State Department. If all of a sudden you get 60 diplomatic cables from 60 different countries all saying that the US market screwed over these investors, the State Department has to then go to the president and say, dude, what's going on? Right? So we got to make as much noise as possible, because they're going to do it to other stocks. They're going to do it to AMC. They're going to do it to GME. If they ever have to force close the billions and billions and billions of synthetic shares they made, let's just stop FINRA from going in, U3 halt, extraordinary event, I don't know, and screwing everybody all over again. And this overall will hurt the US markets because 40% of investment comes from overseas. If we no longer have all that money coming from overseas into American companies, our market's going to shrink a whole bunch and never rebound from that. So, because they're saying, what? South Korea doesn't allow naked shorting. Frankfurt doesn't allow naked shorting. I'm just going to invest in those companies and forget the US markets, forget US companies, screw them. And it removes our ability to be a global superpower if we chase everyone away. We want to be as welcoming as possible to everyone's money. Like why would you not want more money invested in your country? So yeah, we're in the baby steps, making as much noise as possible, and members of Congress are certainly aware. The SEC is aware. The FBI is aware. We got federal judges looking at this stuff now. So this might be, the little tiny straw that broke the camel's back if we do it right. And there's still an outside chance that the powers that be just smush us down and assassinate all of us. I don't know.
Well, they'll just shut you up or say no,
Yeah.
or they'll give you like, here's $50 for your trouble or something
Yeah.
like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like here's a 10-cent off coupon. There you go, kid. Go get yourself something pretty. That's what they're gonna do. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, so all right, let everybody know what they can do. Like specifically, I know you've talked about contact your representative,
Yeah.
but give people a quick short list of what they can do to make some noise on this.
I think the most important thing is get records. So complain to your broker, complain to FINRA, complain to the DTC. Do those three things, and then file a report with the FBI, because it's fraud. What has happened is fraud. You are the victim of fraud to the tune of cajillions of dollars. So get those paper records first. You can also call your representative and you can send them emails. But I think it's most important is find whatever district you're in, find the home office of your elected representative and go there and talk to their chief of staff, tell them what's happening. If multiple people go and complain about the same thing to that same chief of staff, they're going to go, okay, Congressman, we should probably schedule a meeting with these people because they won't stop showing up as a different one every time. If you're in DC, especially, if you're living in the DC area, go to Congress, go to their office building and start knocking on doors, especially of members of the finance committees, and explain to them exactly what I've been talking about here, that a giant fraud has taken place, that the regulators aren't doing their job, and instead they're actually adding to that fraud into the crimes that have been committed, and they're screwing over your constituents. And
I want to interject this too for
Yeah.
anybody out there that owns some of this stock. What is key in these types of things is to have as much paperwork backing this up as possible. Get copies of everything. I invested this amount of money. This is the email where they told me I couldn't sell it. I mean, like, get copies of everything and go to these various organizations. And if you don't own any of this stock, you can at least call your representative and say, hey, we need some regulation on this because there's $600 trillion in derivatives floating out there that are going, that is a massive bomb.
It's a time bomb that's going to explode. And the very likelihood that it happens in this cycle is huge because the bond market's collapsing, and the bond market is the foundation for all margin plays made. It's U.S. bonds, especially. And if right now we're facing a government shutdown crisis because they don't want to extend the debt ceiling, they don't want to pass this omnibus bill, and if the U.S. misses one payment on interest for their bonds, U.S. bonds collapse. If U.S. bonds collapse, that means the Canadian Sovereign Wealth Fund, the French Sovereign Wealth Fund, the Japanese Sovereign Wealth Fund, the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, all these sovereign wealth funds collapse with them. That means every major bank collapses, every hedge fund collapses, every pension fund collapses, the Social Security funds collapse because all of Social Security's investments are in municipal bonds and federal bonds. So, if those collapse and everyone gets margin call at the same time and no one has the money to close any of this stuff, well, how do you ever make a new bank out of this rubble? No one can get credit cards. No one will be able to buy a car. No one will be able to buy a house. You won't be able to get payroll loans. You won't be able to do, if you're a government contractor and you need a 30-day loan before the government pays you for whatever service you did, you can't even get that. So like every step along the way, the entire economy is going to collapse if the bonds collapse. We're already in the middle of the worst bond market since 1788 globally. And and all we need is that one little catalyst to just push us over the edge. And that's it. It's toast. No one will ever borrow money to do anything ever again. So, and that's how our economy works: is borrowing, right? And so, everyone's stuck with massive amounts of debt. Everyone's stuck with all sorts of these swaps are bouncing around, and here we are, a bunch of know nothings in the middle, just trying to get paid for our shares that we were sold that are fake. So.
Wow. Dude, I mean, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing this with us. One of the things I do with the show is I just try to educate people. It's why I started talking about Bitcoin 2.5 years ago, was to educate people on a currency that they can't get caught up in this nonsense. And this is another reason why. Is this from my standpoint of like, and I've warned, I didn't know about this specific thing, but I've been warning my audience. I'm like, a major financial crash is coming. Yeah. And this, you just explained it. I mean, you just mapped out how
even with Bitcoin, you've got huge issues because 80% of Bitcoin was purchased using US dollar tether coin, right? US dollar tether coin, when regulators went investigating, they only found 3 cents on the dollar, and they have no idea who minted US tether coin. So what's happening right now with Binance is that in the last, 10 days, $3.2 billion of Bitcoin has been sold and put into US dollar tether coin. That's more than the actual cash on hand US dollar tether coin has. So if those people cash out, US dollar tether coin depegs, goes to zero, and that brings everything else down with it. So yeah, it was they looked at the bank, like with US dollar tether coin, you're supposed to give them $1, they put it in an account, and it earns interest. And then when you need it back, they give you that $1 and they make their money off of, the difference in interest there. And regulators went to the British Virgin Islands where the bank was, and they found 3 cents on the dollar of the $80 billion that had been given to them. And they have no idea where the rest of it is. It's nowhere to be found. So,
God,
even the crypto market is totally the same guys are playing it, and they're all stealing that money and shipping it off somewhere. So if you got to get out, you got to be the first one out.
It's why I told my audience, I said, buy Bitcoin and put it on a cold wallet. Don't put it on an exchange. Like, get it out of there.
Yeah.
Because look what the FTX thing, and now you're telling me this. It's like a whole reason why.
And the whole reason they want you on the exchange is to do that, the staking, right? And all that is just a giant Ponzi scheme. They're just taking more money from other people and then putting it in your account. And
they're running the exchanges the same way they run their corrupt banks. They've got whatever, $1 million in physical, assets, and then they loan out 100 to 1 or some insane number like that, and they don't actually have it. And this is what I'm warning people. And what you're talking about with this $600 trillion in derivatives floating around out there, that if all of these things go down, like you're saying, this is when, and everybody listen closely to us, this is when, if you got $5,000 in your bank account, you're going to go there and say, I want my cash out. And they're going to go, we can only give you $100 is what's going to happen. And this has happened in Greece. This has happened in other countries.
Oh, it's happening in China right now. Yeah.
Yeah. It's gambling.
Yeah.
They're gambling with our money.
We're lucky that at least that our bank accounts have the federal insurance, so they can print money and make it up.
Right.
But a place like China, where if you put $10 into a savings account in China, the bank has to keep $1 of that in there, to keep 10% of it in there, and they can loan out the other $9. So they loan out the $9 to somebody. That person puts $9 in there, and they keep 90 cents, and they take the other $8.10 and loan it to somebody else, and that somebody puts that $8.10 in there, and they keep 81 cents to loan out the other $7 or whatever. And it keeps working its way down, and then all of a sudden the guy put $10 in there is like, I need my $10 back, and the bank's like, I don't have it, and they just shut the doors and disappear. Yeah. So, and in China, the real estate market is collapsing in a way that we've never seen happen with any economy before. And that's a full third of China's economy is real estate, and it's dropped by 50% in the last year. They've got $14 trillion in bonds they're not paying back for municipal and real estate bonds. And all the banks here in the US and in Canada are the major holders of those bonds. And they can't yet write off that debt. They know they're not getting paid for it. All these companies are in bankruptcy. No one's paying for it. But if they write off the debt, they have to admit they don't have the assets anymore, which then means all the margin that they have is exploded compared to their assets, and they're toast. So they're all just pretending like someday the Chinese are actually going to pay them their money, and they're not. The money's gone. It's in a high-speed rail system we'll never get to enjoy because we paid for it by giving China the money. So, China's Belt and Road project that they're doing around the world, that's all with US dollars. They're paying for that with bonds that we gave them money for. So they're building ports in Djibouti and roads in the Congo with US dollars and not their own money. We paid for all of it. But China's going to get the credit for it because they're the ones doing the work. So, like, why are we paying for them to do that stuff and not pay us back and get all the goodwill when we could have just done that in the first place?
Wow, that's because it's easier for us to bomb. We make more money bombing the shit out of everybody. Like that's Congress. Well, the Senate just gave Joe Biden $858 billion for the war budget. Not one argument, not one between the parties, and not one journalist and any corporate media outlet, MSNBC, Fox, none of them said, how are we going to pay for it? Not one. No. It's always like good stuff. Medicare for all. How are we going to pay for it? That's always, how are we going to pay for student debt forgiveness? How are we going to pay for it? But endless money for these nonstop wars? No questions asked.
Yeah. But my second podcast ever was about basically murdering the private health insurance industry and showing that the money we give now for Medicare and Medicaid is more than enough to pay for the entire healthcare industry if we went to a nationalized healthcare system. Because right, we've got 800,000 doctors, but we've got what 2.1 million administrators. Right, that's what sucks up all the money. Our insurance administrators and the administrators of the hospital, whose job it is to figure out how to deal with the insurance company. But if we adopt the national healthcare system, we'd pay the same rate as the UK, and we pay about $850 billion a year. So it'd save us $2.2 trillion a year to not have health insurance. And we do 1.4 trillion just in Medicare and Medicaid. So, we can do it. The money's there. We just, the middlemen are always the ones that are powerful in America. And those are the ones we cater to. So
all the
we
rules
figure out,
well,
guillotines. I don't know.
We're getting close. Well,
yeah.
If the financial markets collapse and people can't pay their bills and feed their families, then they're going to have no choice. That's the other thing. Ruling elites. If people get that hungry, I'm sorry, then the rules change, and that's what's going to happen. Well, Houston, I really appreciate you taking time to come on the show and sharing your audience to come over here. Anybody who's new to my show, please like, share, and subscribe to my podcast and my YouTube channel. Go over to rockfin.com. And if you're a fan of mine, please go start watching Houston, We Have a Problem YouTube show. Tell everybody where they can follow you.
YouTube's great. I have a Reddit, r/Houston Wade, and then my Twitter is @TheHoustonWade. Those are the three best ways to get in contact with me. I make it a point. I respond to every single solitary DM I've ever gotten. So I respond to everybody. Even if you're threatening to kill me, I'll still respond to you. So I'll respond to everyone. It's a large portion of my day is spent getting back to everyone. I go to sleep, I wake up, I'm like, oh, there's 150 messages. All right, let's start. So that's someday I may have a cajillion subscribers. I just physically can't do it anymore. But until then, I'm still going to try to respond to every single one of you that message me. I think it's the best service I can provide for you guys watching my show. And next Tuesday is my charity show. So we do Charity Tuesday on the last Tuesday of the month, and we've raised in the last year and a half $34,000 for charity.
Holy shit, that's awesome!
Yeah. So I'm not quite sure what this Tuesday's charity is going to be. Last month was Toys for Tots because Christmas was coming up. It might be another kid-related one because it's around Christmas. So we'll figure out what's going to be on Tuesday. People are sending me ideas, and then I'm paralyzed with choice. So yeah.
Well, that's awesome, man. Houston, thank you so much for taking time on the show and really explaining this to us. I really appreciate it. I love getting educated myself and hopefully educating my audience and meeting new people out there in the space that are trying to do the right thing and just educate people on how corrupt the whole system is. It's really.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. I always like getting the info out there and watching people's brains melt when they learn about it. Just see your face go.
Consider it melted. Like it's completely my brain is just a bucket of water right now because you melted it. So thank you so much, Houston, for taking time to come on the show, man. And if you ever need a guest, come on your show and talk about Epstein and the military industrial complex. I'm your guy.
Totally. All right. Awesome.
All right, man. Have a great day. Happy holidays.
You too. See ya.
Take care. Houston Wade, everybody. That's what we're trying to do on this show. And this is why I call this the people's channel. So this was the people. You guys made this happen. Michael McCarthy, who's a fan of the show, was also a comic that I met in Hawaii, reached out to me and said, Graham, you need to be aware of this. And so he made this happen. And I said, Michael, do you want to come on the show? And he goes, actually, you should interview this guy, Houston Wade. He put it together. We met each other on, we started talking on Twitter. I mean, literally, I talked to Houston this morning, I think, and I was like, you want to come on today at 5? And he was like, done. And so this is why I call it the people's channel. You guys make this shit happen. I didn't know anything about this. I didn't know anything about this at all. And one of you reached out to me, and then all these people on Twitter were like, oh, yeah, you guys got to talk about this. Would be really cool. Hey, everybody, thanks for watching. We are still in our 9th month of demonetization from YouTube. So support what we're doing at patreon.com/Graham Elwood or rockfin.com/Graham Elwood, which is a blockchain cryptocurrency platform. It's free to sign up, and there's a premium level at $10 a month. And for that, you get everybody on the platform's premium content. Myself, Lee Camp, Ron Placone, Jimmy Dore, Whitney Webb, Kim Iverson, Abby Martin, and many, many others. You can also support what we're doing at Venmo at Graham-Elwood and go to GrahamElwood.com. We have a PayPal button and a PO box. I also have crypto wallets, which are all in the show notes. Thanks for supporting what we do.